Really? You'll have to know where in Hawaii. I lived in Hawaii for 2 years.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Becky Robinson, and I'm here today with Susan Fowler, and we're so thrilled to share with you the top questions on motivation as sourced by a savvy ruse spark. And I want to take just a moment to introduce Susan formally. As I mentioned at the start of the hour, Susan is the author of Why Motivating People Doesn't Work and What Does, which is now, just this week, available in paperback, and we're so thrilled to celebrate that. Susan is also a keynote speaker and an author of many, many other books, including the soon-to-be re-released book, Self-Leadership in the 1-Minute Manager, co-authored with Ken Blanchard. Am I correct on the co-author?
Absolutely. Well, actually, yes. It's Ken Blanchard and Susan Fowler. Absolutely.
And so also Susan has so many other titles that you can find when you visit her Amazon page. And Susan has been the leader and driver behind the optimal motivation training that the Blanchard organization shares around the world. And Susan, we're so thrilled to have the opportunity to learn with you today.
Thank you, Becky. I'm thrilled as well, and I really want to thank the people on the phone and on the webinar. If you were one of the ones that sent in a question, we're really hoping that maybe your question is one of the top 5 that we're going to answer today. I have to tell you that I have literally been around the world with this material, and we got questions that I've never had before. It was fascinating. So I'm really excited to answer some of these questions today.
Fantastic. Well, so we're going to count these back with the number 5 all the way down to number 1. And then I know at the end of the event, Susan, you've gathered what you call the best of the rest. And we're going to give the audience and attendees a chance to help us decide which of those questions to address. And we're hoping we can get to as many as possible during the hour. So let's get started.
Let's go. So the 5th highest question, this is the one that you all voted on, and it was the 5th place, is why do some people lose motivation for something they really want? I just thought this was a great question, and there's a key word in this question that really has the answer in it. And maybe you can guess, but the word is want. And you have to ask yourself, why do you want what you want? Because it's the reason for your motivation that matters most. So when it comes to motivation, what matters most is the reason for your motivation. So when you say you want something, it's not that you want it. It's not even how badly you want it that matters. It's the reason that you want it that matters. And that may seem like kind of splitting hairs, but it's not. For example, let's say that you really, 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 really want to lose weight. Well, what the research shows us is that the reason you want to lose the weight is what matters. So, for example, there's 6 different motivational outlooks. And your outlook for losing weight is going to determine how successful you are. So let's say that you have the external motivational outlook. That's that orange bubble there. If you have the external motivational outlook for losing weight, that means you're doing it because of image. You want other people to think that you're beautiful or that you are pretty or whatever, or a stud, whatever it is. But it's external. It's about other people's opinion of you. And the research says is that that's the reason that you want to lose weight. There's a real good chance, in fact, more of a chance that you will not succeed. And even if you do succeed, the recidivism, your chances of gaining the weight back are huge because you didn't have the right reason for losing the weight. Let's say that you have the imposed motivational outlook for losing the weight. That means that the reason you're losing weight is because you're afraid. You're afraid of your heart, or you're afraid of disappointing someone, or you're afraid of disappointing yourself. You're not living up to other people's expectations, or maybe even your own expectation. So the reason that you're losing weight is huge. Let's say that you have the aligned motivation, and that is that you actually have a value around being healthy. Or maybe I saw a commercial for one of the diet plans with Marie Osmond, and she said, your body is your gift from God, and your duty is to make the most of that gift. And so that might be a very different way of approaching weight loss based on the values that you have around making the most of a gift that you've been given. So that's what the research says, and that's why a lot of people aren't able, even when they say they really want to achieve something, they don't. So here's the analogy that we make. Let's say that, again, that you want to, let's say, stop smoking, or let's say that you're in sales and you want to be the #1 salesperson. If the reason you want to be the #1 salesperson is external, it's for the reward or the incentive, or it's imposed, you're afraid of what's going to happen to your job, or afraid what's going to happen to you if you don't, you know, be #1 or go on the sales trip. That is like junk food motivation. And just like junk food, it cannot sustain your energy over time. If, however, you have one of the optimal motivational outlooks based on values or a sense of purpose in the case of the integrated motivational outlook, or let's say it's inherent. In other words, maybe you just get joy from serving or from being of service to people, then those are like the healthy reasons for being motivated, and you're much more likely not only to be successful, but to sustain your success. And here's the clincher: once you are successful, you will feel better about it. What's really interesting is that even when we achieve our goal, but our goal was achieved through suboptimal motivation, we will not have the sense of satisfaction that we would have had we been optimally motivated to achieve that goal. So the fact is, we can achieve our goals, whether it's through junk food motivation or through optimal motivation, but you're going to sustain it, and you are more likely to achieve it, and you're going to feel better about yourself when you do. There's some extraordinary research around this. There's so much research around this, but some of the results that we've seen is that when you are optimally motivated, when you have a sense of well-being as a result of being optimally motivated, then you have, compared to other people, 31% higher productivity, 3 times more creativity. You're 10 times more engaged by your job. You will have 37% more sales, and you're 3 times more satisfied with your job. And these kinds of results come from your daily doses of optimal motivation. So the answer, maybe the long answer, but I think a really powerful answer to the question, why do we sometimes not achieve things even when we really want to, is because we want to for the wrong reasons. Hope that makes some sense. Becky, do you think I'm safe to go to my next question?
I think so, and it makes a lot of sense to me. If anyone does have questions along the way or needs clarifications on our answers for these top 5 questions, or should I say Susan's answers to these top 5 questions, I'm happy to share those comments and questions with her along the way. So please feel free to put those in the panel for me. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Becky. Okay,
sure
so
that salad looks like what I ate for lunch.
I know. I was just wanting to make sure you chewed and swallowed. So the next highest votes that, or the question that got the next highest amount of votes, number 4, is this one. How do you remain motivated in an environment that's not supportive to your growth and development? How do you keep yourself motivated? So those were actually, that was the 4th highest question and the 3rd highest question that I blended together because I think they are really two and of the same. I just think this is a fascinating question. Let me just share with you again this spectrum of motivation model. And what you'll notice in this model is the horizontal line across the bottom. It says psychological needs. And maybe you'll notice that when you are suboptimally motivated at work, you have low-quality psychological needs. And when you have optimal motivation, you have high-quality psychological needs. So what we know is that organizations where people can experience their psychological needs, where there's high quality possibility of achieving those psychological needs, that you're going to be more optimally motivated. But there's a lot of organizations, you know what, I would say every organization doesn't understand sometimes, even with their best of intentions, how they actually erode our basic psychological needs. And I need to just back up for a minute because this is so important. Here's a basic truth that I think is one of the most profound things to come out of the research. And by the way, when I say the research, I just want to show you something real quick. This is a new book that's been put out by the authors, I don't know if you can see this, of Self-Determination Theory. This is an extraordinary work, a lifetime of work by the fathers of the science of motivation, Dr. Edward Deci and Richard Ryan. And one of the things that they are very clear on is that our basic nature as human beings is that we want to thrive. Nobody wants to be bored. Nobody wants to be disengaged. People want a meaningful challenge. People want to contribute to whatever it is that they are belonging to. And so if we take that premise that people want to thrive, and then we say, but how do people thrive? This is where the major groundbreaking breakthroughs are in the science of motivation, is that we finally understand what makes people thrive. And it lies in those basic psychological needs. Now, you may have heard these called by other names. I use the research terms because there's a reason they chose these terms, and I want to honor the work that these people have been doing for over 60 years now. And the basic psychological needs are for autonomy, relatedness, and competence. And so what I'm going to suggest to you is that if you're a leader, your real job is to help make sure that people's psychological needs are satisfied every day at work. And if your organization is not supportive of your psychological needs, if they're kind of undermining your motivation, then it's your responsibility to make sure your psychological needs are satisfied. Because if they're not, you're not going to flourish, you're going to languish. And it's just, life is too short to go to work every day and not flourish. So what you really need to do is to say, how can I meet my needs for autonomy? In other words, how can I have this perception that I have a choice? You know, even babies grabbing the spoon and trying to feed themselves, they recognize the power of having choice, that they are in some way control, that they have some freedom within the boundaries that have been given, but they have some sense of control and choice in their life. And so you have to ask yourself every day you go to work, do I have a choice to go or not go? Yeah, you do. You don't have to go to work. You could choose to live in poverty. You could choose to not support your family. You could choose to do something else. And so to the extent that we can recognize that we have choices, we will not be beat down by the organization or by policies that unwittingly are eroding our sense of autonomy. You know, I just like to just think about what it's like when you don't have autonomy. That's when, for example, with really good intentions, organizations try to bribe you to do something. For some reason, they believe that you need incentives in order to sell or to produce or to serve your customers. And so what happens is we get hooked by those incentives and those rewards because we don't understand how to frame that as information rather than as something that's actually creating pressure or tension or a motivation outside of ourselves. So what we really need to be doing is helping ourselves in our organizations to say, what choices do I have? What freedom do I have within boundaries? And every time you feel a sense of pressure or tension or stress, then recognize, wow, okay, I'm not experiencing autonomy right now. Have you ever said, they don't pay me enough to do this? I have to tell you, that is such a clue, because the fact is that there is never enough money in the world to substitute for your lack of autonomy, relatedness, and competence. And so if you ever hear yourself saying, they can't pay me enough to do this, it's not the money. It is your lack of autonomy, your lack of relatedness, and your lack of competence, which is being threatened. So what you need to be able to ask yourself then is, wow, why are my relatedness needs not being met, or are they not being met? Because we have a need to be cared about and to care about people. We have a need to feel connected without feeling like people are manipulating us or using us, or that we're part of their ulterior motive, and that we need to contribute to something greater than ourselves. And so science says that when we don't have the opportunity to do these things, that we are not going to flourish at work. Think about this. What's the opposite of not having our relatedness needs met at work? It's feelings of isolation. You wonder why people are so connected to social media. It's because they think or they hope that social media is going to satisfy their needs for relatedness. But unfortunately, too many of us have externalized by wondering, how many friends do I have? How many likes did I get on that Instagram post? Oh, how many LinkedIn connections do I have? How many Twitter followers do I have? So we've externalized, and then it ends up beating us up, and we're still feeling isolated or less than. I read where plastic surgery has soared because of social media, because people want to look good on social media. So what does that say about our need for image? And so the very thing that we created in order to help us feel more connected is actually doing just the opposite in many, many cases. I have to tell you that if you're working in an organization where you think their practices are unfair, let's say they have a hypo program, like high potentials, but you don't know what the criteria is to be a high potential, and you haven't been selected to be a high potential. I have to tell you, what you typically do is check out because you don't feel a connection. You don't know what it takes to belong. You want to belong, but only the people who are high potentials really belong. And I have to tell you, there's even high potentials who don't even know why they're high potentials. And if you're not a high potential, what are you, a low potential? You know, oh, they're hypos, I'm a low-po. How does that make you feel? You know, and if all they do is identify 5 or 10% of the population that are high potentials, what does that say about the 90% of the rest of us? So it's really interesting how organizations, again, unwittingly and with the best of intentions, tend to erode the very psychological needs that we have in order to thrive at work. We have a third psychological need for competence, and what I would ask you is every day, if you're feeling, again, pressures, tension, stress, maybe a little down, ask yourself if maybe it's because I'm feeling ineffective. I'm not really meeting the challenges and opportunities that I have every day. Maybe I haven't gotten the training that I need. Maybe I'm not actually able to demonstrate that I'm getting more skillful in my job and in my ability to cope with changes that are taking place. Maybe I don't have a sense that I'm growing and learning every day. So think about the opposite of feeling competent at work. What happens is you feel like you don't have what it takes to cope with change or to live with ambiguity. There's a lot of uncertainty in your workplace, and you don't have the competence to deal with that uncertainty. So I think what we really have to do is, if we are working in an organization that we don't feel supports our own growth, that we don't feel supports us, then what we really need to do is to say, how do I practice satisfying my own autonomy, relatedness, and competence? And can I just say something that around relatedness? I just saw a research study that I think is really profound, and it says that people gain more satisfaction from actually caring about other people than being cared about by other people. And so if you don't feel like your organization cares about you, if you don't feel like your manager really cares about you, you know what the antidote to that is? Care about them. Care about your clients. Care about your customers. Care about your coworkers. The more you care about them, the more you will thrive. So there's a lot of strategies, and in fact the book that I'm writing now, which is about motivation as a skill, is really about these kinds of strategies that individuals can use to thrive even when the environment isn't supportive of your psychological needs.
That is really powerful. I hope that if someone is tweeting that they tweeted that out.
Because I have no idea what I said.
You said, Susan, that the antidote of not feeling cared about is to care about others.
Oh. Okay, thank you for reminding me. I appreciate that. I get into the moment, and I couldn't repeat what I said, but I felt it fully when I said it. Thanks, Becky.
Sure.
Okay, well, I'm going to go on to our third question if the timing is right.
It is indeed.
Okay, here we go. The third most voted upon question was, what's the difference between motivation and engagement? I think this is a really important question, and I'm really glad that it ended up in the top 3, because I'm going to take for granted, but I'm going to show you these slides anyway, that most of you on this webinar have probably seen these statistics ad nauseum. I do not read a blog. In fact, I probably don't even write a blog where these statistics aren't mentioned in some way when it comes to engagement. That there are actively disengaged employees who are costing organizations $350 billion a year. Okay, so these are people that are coming to work every day, and they're not taking advantage of the opportunities to produce, and so it's opportunity loss, but it's also the cost of people not coming to work, sick days, taking days off, mental health days. It's retention, it's the cost of losing employees and having to rehire employees. It costs like 5 times more to hire a new employee than it would cost to actually help an old employee be more satisfied, and yet we keep having turnover. So we know these statistics. We also know that organizations are spending nearly $750 million a year to fix it. And I work with a lot of organizations who are spending tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars every year on engagement surveys, on task forces, that after they take a survey, they put people together in a task force, and they go, okay, how are we going to get our numbers up? Let's come up with all of these tactics and these strategies to improve our scores. The problem is people are coming up with strategies and they don't even understand what the root cause of the problem is. And so their strategies don't work. In fact, we saw this as such a phenomenon that about 8 years ago now, the Ken Blanchard companies started asking the question, how is it that people become engaged or disengaged in the first place? And I am going to do a little full disclosure here. My husband, Dr. Drea Zagarmi, is actually the head of research at the Ken Blanchard companies, and he has won 3 cutting-edge research awards for his work on what is now what we call employee work passion, which is the upper end of engagement. So you might be familiar with there's actively disengaged employees, there's disengaged employees, there's engaged employees, but what we now have proof of is that there's actually an upper end called employee work passion. And these are the people who are actively engaged in the workplace. So what we did was we set out, and I say we because I'm part of the Ken Blanchard companies, and my husband and I do a lot of research together. And what we discovered, although I'll give Drea and his team the book of the credit here, and what they've been writing about is this appraisal process. And this is what we go through every single day, multiple times during the day. We are appraising our environment. Like, for example, Becky and I, we were on the phone together hours before this webinar, making sure we had our act together. We were feeling really good. We would have had a positive appraisal in that moment of what was happening to us. And then right at 9:30, when we actually turn on the GoToMeeting, all of a sudden everything fell apart. And we're going, oh no, and how you know that everything will be okay, but there's that moment of panic. And so what happens is we're constantly appraising what's happening to us. And we're appraising it both cognitively through what we think, but also emotionally. Like, darn it, I can't believe this is happening. And you feel that kind of slow panic coming up from your gut and kind of flooding your system. And that leads to a sense of whether you're feeling a sense of well-being or ill-being, okay? And what's ironic, I think, is that our emotion is really what determines our sense of well-being or ill-being, and that's what leads to our intentions, which lead to our behavior, which leads to whether we're disengaged or have employee work passion. Yet, those emotions tend to be the most underestimated power in the workplace. In fact, people are not even really allowed to think or talk about emotions at work. And so I just think it's really sad that the thing that probably creates the greatest impact on our intentions, which lead to our behavior, is something that we really don't know much about at work, and we don't study it or teach people how to cope with their emotions very effectively at work. So anyway, that was just my little riff. The real F word in organizations is feelings, and I think we need to get over that. We need to figure that out. But this appraisal process happens constantly, but over time, the effect of the appraisal process is what leads to either disengagement or somewhere along that continuum of employee work passion. So we started looking at this and thinking, wow, what if we could teach people how to better manage their appraisal process? Could we actually teach managers and leaders how to help people manage this appraisal process more effectively? Then we would actually be able to affect engagement, disengagement, employee work passion before people get there. And that is when we came to the real conclusion and understanding, because I've been studying motivation for over 20 years, and this is where our the science of engagement and motivation came together, we realized motivation is a skill. Motivation is the skill of shifting our motivational outlook from suboptimal to optimal. And if we can do that, if we can teach people and if we can teach leaders how to facilitate that, then here's the bottom line. And here's really where we get this intersection of engagement and motivation. Then we begin to realize that the key to engagement is day-to-day motivation. Suboptimal motivation is what fuels employee disengagement. And to the extent that people are disinterested, they have external motivational outlooks, they have imposed motivational outlooks, that ultimately will lead to employee disengagement or active disengagement, where they actually start sabotaging the organization. But to the extent that people are optimally motivated, and the frequency of their optimal motivation throughout the day will lead to engagement and employee work passion. There is a direct, and Blanchard's own research shows this, a direct correlation between optimal motivation and the 5 intentions of employee work passion, which are, if I can remember them, is to perform at above expected standards of expectation, to perform with discretionary effort so that you're actually, if you have some time on your hands instead of playing Candy Crush, you're actually doing things on behalf of the organization, that you are actually endorsing the organization to others, that you are talking about what a great place to work this is and trying to get your friends and family to come to work with your same company, that you're actually saying good things about the leaders in the organization, and that you have organizational citizenship behaviors, that you actually want to go beyond your job role. So how many was that? Anyway, performance, discretionary effort, endorsing, I think there's one more, organizational citizenship behavior, and I'll think of the 5th one. But those are the intentions that people have when they are optimally motivated, and I just think that's pretty exciting stuff. Mm-hmm. So what's the difference between engagement and motivation? Motivation is what fuels engagement. Engagement is a state of being that happens over time, and then a person is in that state. But the reasons that people become engaged or disengaged is their motivation.
That's very helpful.
That makes sense?
It does.
Okay. Well, we're whipping through these. We're coming up now to a question that I've never heard before, Becky. Like I said, I have literally been around the world with my book and with training optimal motivation, and I've never had anyone ask this question. And this is the question that got the 2nd highest number of votes. And it's this: how do you rid the culture of entitlement thinking? I just thought that was a fascinating question. And so then you have to say, what is entitlement thinking? What does that really mean? And a lot of the clients that I work with, entitlement thinking is people who think that they deserve something even though they haven't earned it. And I know that we say that a lot about millennials, like, oh, this younger generation, they come in and they just think they're entitled to certain pay levels or certain, promotions or certain benefits, even though they haven't paid their dues. I have to tell you, I have been in the workforce for, I'm not going to tell you, but it's half a decade. And I'm sorry, I'm just thinking about that. Oh my God, that's a long time.
Half a decade?
I mean, half a century.
Indeed.
That's really scary. Half a century. So, at any rate, the reason I share that at the risk of exposing myself is because I've always heard that. I have always heard that no matter which generation is coming in, that they have this entitlement thinking. So there's this kind of hopefulness, I think, that people come into the workplace thinking, I'm good. I've been told I'm good. I deserve this. But I also think entitlement thinking happens because of the procedures or the policies that we have in the workplace. So take sales, for example. I think that one of the reasons that I hear for not moving away from incentives and bonuses and sales trips is because people expect them. And organizations are afraid to take away something that people have come to expect. I was actually working with a company that I showed them the study on how when you reward people for healthy behaviors like losing weight, it doesn't work. What the research shows is that, like, for example, you say, I'm going to give someone, if you lose X number of pounds over this period of time, we're going to give you an iPad. Okay, so this is a pretty common practice. And I even talked to the brokerage services, the insurance brokerage services that are the instigators of a lot of this. And I said, that doesn't work. And they said, oh, well, yeah, it does. People really lose weight when we offer an iPad. And I said, well, they lose weight for the duration of the program. Maybe. A lot of people don't. They get into it and they go, this is so hard and I don't really need an iPad. Or, I have an iPhone, I don't really need an iPad. Or, you know what, I really prefer a Surface instead of an iPad, so I'm not going to lose the weight. So what happens is you get a lot of people who are dropping out because they just get disinterested because they think the reason they're doing it is for the iPad. And then when they realize the iPad isn't worth it, then they drop out. So the research that these insurance companies are looking at doesn't really measure the people who either don't get involved because they don't care about the prize and they've rationalized it, or they get in and they drop out because they don't care about the prize. So they look at the people who stay in and lose weight, and they go, wow, look at how many people lost weight. But what they didn't do was then look at what happened after the program ended. And so now there's significant research that shows that just within 2 months after the program ends, the majority of people not only gain the weight back that they lost, they gain even more weight back. And then they go into kind of a slight depression because they are now disappointed with themselves. They're frustrated, and they are not as hopeful. And they're less likely to ever join that kind of a program again, or they will join it again just to get the prize with full recognition that there's really no intention to actually have that be a sustained behavior change. So what happens is organizations offer all these prizes and these contests and these incentives, and they're afraid to take them away. So I was sharing with you that I was working with a company that was afraid. They had an entitlement program where they said to people, if you keep doing these healthy behaviors, we'll give you $100 every year. And they were afraid to take that away from people because they thought people would think they don't care anymore. Mm-hmm. So I think that this is a really interesting question related to motivation. So I'm going to share something I've never shared before. I've been doing a lot of thinking about this, but I hope that maybe people will give us some feedback on this, if this makes sense to you. There is something called relative deprivation. And relative deprivation, I can't even say it, relative deprivation, and it's not relative, what do we call it the other day, Becky?
Depravity.
Yeah, relative depravity. No, it's not that. Relative deprivation. And what this is, it describes being deprived of something that a person feels entitled to, maybe because they've always gotten it, they've gotten used to it, they expect to have it, or they see that others have it. Now, here's the perfect example, and if you've never seen this, you really have to, after we're done with our webinar today, you have got to go on YouTube and look up monkeys and grapes. That's all you have to do, and you're going to go to this video. And this is a video of researchers who are giving these two monkeys who are in side-by-side cages cucumbers. And, monkeys like the cucumbers, they're fine, and so they're eating their cucumbers and they're doing just fine. And then the research starts giving the monkey in the right-hand cage grapes, but keeps feeding the other monkey cucumbers. Now, monkeys are smart, and the monkey on the left starts noticing that this other monkey's getting grapes. And so he starts trying to grab for the grapes. By the time the video is over, that monkey is going bonkers, bouncing all around the cage, shaking the cage, literally slapping the cucumber away. Here was a monkey that was perfectly happy with his cucumber until he realized that somebody else was getting something different. And then he wanted that something different. He didn't even know what it was. Or maybe if he did, maybe he's saying, I like grapes better. But it was this feeling of, I'm not getting what I think I should get. And so what we're really saying with relative deprivation is that in this case, the monkey probably felt like his psychological need for relatedness wasn't being met. It was unfair. If you're in an organization and your organization has unfair practices, or they promote somebody that you felt like you were just as qualified as that other person, and you don't know why they got promoted and you didn't, or there's a group of people in an organization. I was working with an organization, a software company recently, and the people who support the programmers felt like the company was really unfairly biased towards the programmers because they were like the stars in the company, but the people who were in service, who nothing would ever happen without them, didn't get the bonuses, didn't get the incentives, didn't get the kind of attention during the annual speech by the president of the company. They didn't get acknowledged. So even though they might not have, even though the science says that they would be less satisfied with rewards and incentives and all of that external praising, they saw that other people were getting it and felt that it's unfair. So that would be their relative deprivation. We're not getting something that we think other people are getting, and that's not fair. So it's eroding our psychological need. Here's an example. Let's say that you go on a diet, and you say, okay, I can't eat anything with gluten. I can't eat anything with sugar. And so you have all of these things you can't eat that you were eating before. So now what happens is that you have this relative deprivation. You're feeling like, oh, man, I can't eat what I wanted to. So what do you want? You want your autonomy. You now don't feel like you have the same choices that you had before. And so your psychological need for autonomy has been eroded. This is going to be a big thing in my book, is talking about why diets don't work, is because diets immediately erode your sense of autonomy. And so the way you get your autonomy back is to eat what you were eating before. Get your autonomy back. Look what's happening with Obamacare. Obamacare is a really fascinating example. Some people might not have even thought about Obamacare before, but as soon as it's going to be taken away from them, then they're willing to stand up for it. So maybe it's like, I don't have the autonomy. I want to choose whether I give up Obamacare or have Obamacare. And I don't think it's fair because, there's people who really want it. And I don't have the competence to understand how to deal with the healthcare system. So this whole healthcare issue might be actually eroding all of their psychological needs for autonomy, relatedness, and competence, and really kind of tipping that relative deprivation to a point where people are feeling hostile and frustrated by it. So if we don't have our psychological needs met, then what's a beautiful thing about the spectrum of motivation model is that that vertical line, which is self-regulation, teaches us that motivation is a skill, and that if we are feeling that there's things in the environment that are not fair, then we can start self-regulating to actually create an environment for ourselves that is more fair. So this is a topic I'd like to do more about. I'd like to help organizations teach, for example, the shifting strategies, so that instead of feeling like if we take something away from people, they're going to experience relative deprivation, how can we actually reframe things to help people be more mindful about their choices, to help people align with values that are more important than whatever it is we're taking away, to help people connect to a purpose that's more powerful than what they're now no longer going to receive. So I think there's a lot of work that we can do about this, and I just wanted to thank, by the way, if you're on this session today and you're the person that asked that question originally or voted for it, I'd love to. We're going to have some time maybe to talk a little bit after we're done here. I'd love to talk to you about where this question came from, and if you think these ideas I just shared are worth pursuing, because, again, that was a question I've never had before.
Great.
Okay. So, Becky, I've got time to go to our fifth question and maybe get one more in. Does that sound good?
Yes.
Okay. This is the number one question that got literally hundreds of votes. How can leaders best help employees explore their own motivation? What are the best questions to ask in order to assess your own motivation or someone else's motivation? So that first question was the number one asked question. And then the second question I pulled in there because it was in the top 10, and I thought it was related to the top 1. And so one of my experiences, I just need to share real quickly. I put up this slide. I was doing a session in China, and for those of you that have ever worked in China, or maybe you are Chinese, you know that the culture is so respectful that when you're in a large group, there's very little kind of interruption or even hand raising. People are more comfortable working in small groups or, talking to you during the break. And so I put this slide up. A leader cannot motivate anyone, but a leader can shape the environment that will help people to be more optimally motivated. And all of a sudden, this Chinese man, a supervisor, yells, shocking. And we all jumped, and it was just so out of character. And then I looked at him and I said, what? He goes, well, it's just shocking. And I said, okay, but what's so shocking? He said, I have been a manager for many years, and I have always been held accountable for motivating people. And now you're telling me that I can't motivate people. And I said, that's right. I said, how do you feel about that? He goes, I'm shocked. I'm just shocked. And I said, yeah, I get that you're shocked. Why are you shocked? He says, because I can't do what I've been asked to do. He says, I'm shocked. He says, but I'm also really relieved. And I think that is a feeling that a lot of leaders get when they start to understand the science of motivation, that they've been frustrated. They thought the way we motivate people is to give them something, that people are not going to be motivated if we don't give them something. Oh, can you see on the screen?
I can see the fish.
Oh, good. Okay. So what we want to ask people is not if they're motivated, but we want to ask them why. So don't assume that people are not motivated. Go in with this assumption. They are motivated. They might just not be motivated the way you want them to be motivated. So you have to ask them, why are they motivated? And then that's the conversation you need to have. So just like an engineer who, when they've got a problem, like with a machine or a piece of equipment, they will ask 5 whys before they get to the root cause of the problem. We need to learn to do the same thing. If I am feeling disinterested in something, if I've got low energy, if I am externally motivated, it's all about the money, what I need to start doing is asking myself, why is that? Why? And if you're a leader and you have this trusting relationship that you could build with your direct reports, and you could say, let's talk about your motivation. Why is this goal important to you? Or why isn't it important to you? Or why do you come to work every day? That is just such a powerful, powerful question. And there's a way to ask it. It's not like a coaching question. It's not about taking people forward. It is a motivational outlook conversation question to help people go deep, to help them go down into their reasons, their rationale for why they're motivated the way they are, or maybe to help them to explore their emotions, which could be very, very powerful. So what we've created, and I write about this in my book. In our training sessions, we actually do a lot more with this, and it's something I'm going to be writing a lot more about because we're learning more about it every day. I think one of the reasons that the work that we're doing is getting so much, we're being embraced by the academic and scientific community because we're taking the science and we're really applying it and we're learning from it. So what we're saying is, here's what works. Encourage autonomy. So what leaders need to do is every day, instead of saying, here's what you're going to do and here's, what you got to do, how did you do this, instead to encourage autonomy by asking people, what choices did you make today? Tell me about, I know we've given you a lot of boundaries, we've given you limitations, but what freedom do you think you have within those boundaries? So to actually start asking questions that help people come to, yeah, I do have some autonomy. I am making choices. I do have options. To ask questions every day about relatedness. By asking why, you can actually help people get in touch with the meaning behind their work. So what if you ask people, what meaning do you find in doing this? why would you want to do this? How is this purposeful? How does this relate to your values? What are the values that you have? Developing competence. So to ask people at the end of every day, what did you learn? How did you grow from this experience? I love WD-40. Gary Ridge, who's the CEO of WD-40, is a personal friend, and he is wonderful, and he says, we will have no more mistakes at WD-40. All we have are learning opportunities. So they'll go to a meeting, and so I say, boy, did we learn a lot yesterday. So whenever there's a mistake, they look at that as a learning opportunity, and that's just so healthy. It's helping people develop competence on a day-to-day basis. And then help people promote mindfulness. The question why actually helps people promote mindfulness. But also just to ask people, how are you feeling about that? And helping them to realize that they have choices about how they feel, to align with values. I would encourage leaders and individuals to really develop your own values. Yes, pay attention to the organizational values, but then ask yourself, how do my own personal values play into the organization's values? And do I actually have a sense of purpose? And how does that purpose get lived every day at work? So what we're teaching leaders is how to ask questions that promote autonomy, relatedness, and competence, and that actually promote mindfulness, aligning with values, and connecting to purpose. And if we can teach leaders to do that, if those could actually become competencies that leaders have, then I believe that the workplace is going to go a long way to being a place where people can flourish, where people can thrive. So that's the quick and easy answer to the question, what questions do leaders need to start to ask? And if you go on my website, I actually have written blogs on the most important questions that leaders need to ask, especially around autonomy, relatedness, and competence. And I will be writing a new series around the questions that leaders need to ask to promote mindfulness, align with values, and to connect with purpose. So I'm hoping you'll think that that's helpful. So Becky, you know what I'd like to do? These are some of the best questions from the rest. In other words, we selected the top 5 that got the top 5 votes. And then there were, as we said, hundreds of questions that came in. And as I went through those questions, these were some that I thought were pretty intriguing. So could we just take 30 seconds or so and ask people to put the letter in the chat? You want to explain how they would do that?
Well, sure. Okay. So we're going to use the question panel. We have too many choices to use a poll on GoToWebinar. So if you can see some of these questions that are the best of the rest, and if there's one you'd like Susan to answer, just simply type in the letter, and I'm going to watch those come in. And once I've seen a few come in, we'll make a selection. And we do have time barely for one more question within the hour. So I'm going to give people a couple more seconds. It looks like a fairly even distribution, but I am seeing a lot of B's. Well, and now D's and G's.
Okay, so B, D, and G. Okay, let me just see what B is. Okay, is there a different approach for millennials and baby boomers? Let me just say this really quickly about that, because I think that's something I really need to be doing more writing about. The psychological needs of autonomy, relatedness, and competence are true no matter what your gender or generation, no matter what your culture, race, or creed. So if you're a human being, you have needs, if you're going to thrive, for autonomy, relatedness, and competence. The way those needs get played out in the workforce or in life may be different generationally. So that is why, for example, millennials tend to say, well, I have a real need for relatedness, but I'm going to do it through social media. Whereas a baby boomer, there's a wonderful commercial out for, I think it's Toyota, where that shows a millennial who's like on Facebook and commenting on all of her friends and on her computer. And then on the split screen, her parents, who are baby boomers, are out square dancing and going to dinner and actually doing things with friends, and the millennial is saying, oh, I feel so sorry for my parents. They only have 90 friends on Facebook. And so it's just that it gets played out differently, but the psychological needs are the same. And so what we really need to do a better job of is saying, how do we meet the psychological needs of every human being in a way where they recognize them and can satisfy them. Okay, D, there's more to be said about that, but I hope that kind of gives you a tipping, just a tip of the iceberg answer. What was it? B, D? Why are managers so poor at understanding motivation? You know why? There's actually this phenomenon, and Ken Kovacs wrote about this in his 1980s research, which has been replicated every year since the 1980s, called Why Motivational Theories Don't Work. And the reason was because as soon as a manager puts on a manager lens, puts on those glasses of a manager, they see people differently. So even though when you ask managers, what are you most motivated by, they are more likely to say that they are motivated by things that are internally generated, like appreciation for their work, or being asked questions about their work. So they'll talk about motivation that comes that would be more inherent. So it'd be like our optimal motivation, like aligned, integrated, or inherent motivation. But when they are asked, what do you think motivates other people? All they see is people's external behavior. They don't know what's going on inside a person's head, so they tend to think that other people are motivated externally. And also, when you're really miserable, what do? You go and you say, I need more money, okay, or I need greater benefits. And so there's this big phenomenon where managers tend to not understand that what motivates them could potentially be what motivates other people in terms of the basic psychological needs. And so they attribute external factors rather than internal factors. So I just think that's really interesting. And that's why we need to teach managers about the nature of motivation. And gee whiz, aren't some people just lazy? Why are some people motivated to do something and some are not? And no. The research says that by our nature, we want to thrive. If someone is, quote unquote, acting in a lazy way, it's because their psychological needs have been eroded and they don't know what to do. For example, in times of change, when a lot of change is happening, then people will be so overwhelmed. They don't know how to cope with the ambiguity or the uncertainty of change, and so they become disinterested, and then they get labeled as lazy. What they really are is just a place where they don't feel like they have any choices, they don't see the meaning of the change, and they don't have the competence necessary to deal with it. So laziness is a function of psychological needs not being satisfied. And if we could understand that, then I think we would have a lot of energetic, positively energetic people. So that was really, really fast. I know we're at the end of our time, Becky. So
we are, and I want to make sure before we wrap up the hour formally that we let people know how they can find out more from you and get more resources from you. But I think you have something to say first.
Well, no, I just wanted to say that if think about what's become clear today, and we'd love to hear about it. If you could write that in the panel as well. And if you still have questions, then to Becky's point, we have a lot of resources. So the book is available in all different forms, so whatever your poison is, hardcover, paperback, or Kindle or audio. Also, if you want to go to the website, my website at www.susanfowler.com, there is a free motivational outlook assessment that you can take, and it's really fun, and it gives you instant results. I would also like to just say that if you're really interested in having training or skill building, that the Ken Blanchard Companies has a program based on all of this. And if you go to the Ken Blanchard website, just www.kenblanchard.com, then you will see what's available. They have also free white papers and a lot of wonderful material available at the Ken Blanchard website.
So Susan, thank you so much for investing in this hour with us. We do have a few copies of Why Motivating People Doesn't Work and What Does to give away today. And I don't want to tell you to send feedback and then you'll have a chance to win, because then you would be suboptimally motivated by this reward. However, we do welcome your feedback. I did actually just create another Savvy Ruse Spark to ask the question, what was made clear today? And I put the link in the chat window. And if you'd like to be able to answer that and share with us what you learned from today's event, we'd love to read that. And maybe you enjoyed playing the first time to give your questions, play again to show us what you learned. And Susan, I know you have some parting thoughts. And I also want to let people know we have this new after party approach where once we formally close the session, we will stay on if you have additional questions and want to talk with Susan. So I'm going to let Susan share a parting thought, and then I'm going to stop the recording, and then you can stay around afterwards if you'd like to talk further.
Yeah, I'll just take 10 seconds, Becky, and just first of all, I want to say thank you to anyone who's stuck with us through this, because it means that you have an inherent interest or an aligned or an integrated interest in optimal motivation for understanding motivation. And I truly believe with all my heart that the great science that's behind motivation could literally change the way we work. And if we start to apply it, instead of just understand it, if we start to apply it, I honestly believe we'll make a difference in the world. And I just think the world needs it right now. It needs people who are optimally motivated, empathetic, understanding, and doing the right things for the right reasons. And so I want to thank you for that.
Thanks so much.